As Jews, we attach significance to lots of things. In the Polish Zem, that's S-J-E-M, not sure I've pronounced that correctly, a few decades ago, one of the delegates to the Zem was trying to create an unfavorable impression of the Jewish people. He was not particularly pro-Jewish. In fact, he was anti-Semitic. And he said to one of the leaders of the Polish parliament, he says, these people are so ridiculous. They're so petty. They even have laws for what order to cut their fingernails in, which is true. We do. The Polish leader who was accosted with his criticism, thought about it. And he turned around and said, no, I think it's the other way around. What a special people that they can even find significance in the order of them cutting their fingernails. And the truth is, that's what Avraham Avinu taught us. Abraham was not the first monotheist. Noach and him overlapped for a little bit. Methuselah certainly overlapped with Avraham. Avraham wasn't innovative in terms of his monotheism. What he did was he spread that monotheism had to be expressed in this world. There's a significance to what we do in this world. Now, given that we believe in significance, and of course the written word, especially the word of God, is massively significant, as is all its details, as are all its details. There's a very interesting, I guess you'd call it repetition, doubling of sorts in both Parshas Vayechi and Parshas Shemos. And it goes like this. Yosef's death is reported in Vayechi, which is the last parasha of Bereshis, and it's also reported again in Shemos, the first parasha of Chumash Shemos. Question is, why the tautology? Why repeat it? What is the significance of that? Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner, an amazing personality. It's worth reading a little bit of history. He was actually on a plane that was hijacked once upon a time in the 70s. And the legend has it that the hijackers realized that they had quite an important person on board. And they went up to him and offered him a drink. Would you like a drink? And he said, I'll have a Coke. He was quite assertive, quite strict. Anyway, so they brought him his Coca-Cola. And he looked around at them and he said, no ice. In other words, he was trying to show them, I may have a lack of freedom. I might be constricted at this point, but that doesn't mean that I am going to give up my independence, my ability to fight for what I want, even if that happens to be ice and a Coke. Anyway, point being, Rav Hutner in his book Pachad Yitzchak says an amazing thing. He says that there's a difference qualitatively or thematically, conceptually, between Bereshis and Shemos. He quotes the Ramban. He says, Bereshis is the story of the roots, the Shrashim, whereas Shemos is the story of the outgrowth of those roots. In other words, Bereshis is the story of the Avos. The Avos were not just, figureheads, titular, interesting people, role models. They were all of that, but they were more. As Rav Dessler elaborates, the Avos provided our national gene pool. That means what the others did laid down a certain propensity, certain sensitivities within our DNA. And you look around the world and you'll see it. Why are we transfixed on Israel? You ask a Jew anywhere, they've got a strong opinion about Israel. What's Israeli policy, what we should be doing, what Israel should be doing? Because Abraham's test was to go to Israel. Lech Lecha, he forged a national consciousness with regards to Israel, in our DNA. Why are Jews philanthropic? Why are we great at benevolence, at giving stock, at charity, caring for people? Look at the organizations we've set up, the money we raise. Because Avraham was a man of chesed. Why, unfortunately, are we great at self-sacrifice? Religious, not religious. When the time comes for it, we will sacrifice ourselves for our values. Because Yitzchak did that at the Akedah. Jews of all kind of walks and stripes, religious, not religious, are performing bris milah, circumcision, if they're male, because Avraham, that was one of his tests. In other words, the test that the others went through, the trials they went through, implanted things into our national consciousness, and we became who we are as a result. We are the outgrowth of those roots. Says Rav Hutner, Bereshis is the story of the Avos. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, they implanted national consciousness. Later on, Shemos is the story of how that plays out. They are no longer implanting things in our consciousness, they are reflecting the roots. Says Rav Hutner that Yosef had the tremendous privilege of being both one of the Avos in a certain sense and one of the Bonim, in others, the reflection of the Avos. On the one hand, of course, he was a child of the Avos. He was a child of Yaakov, and therefore he's not an Av in his own right, hence his death being reported in Chumash Shemos. But on the other hand, he was in a certain sense one of the Avos. His two children became tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, in their own right. He himself added to our national gene pool, as we'll explain in a second. And therefore his death is reported in Bereshis. Let's make this a little bit more pragmatic, a bit more practical. Firstly, what did Yosef add? What did Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov not give that Yosef did? And Rav Hutner again comes up with the jackpot. He says like this. He says, Avraham taught us that you can come from nothing and be something. He came from an idolatrous family, but he became something, a leader of the Jewish people. Yitzchak told us that you can be born into a great family and continue that way. In other words, unlike Yishmael, you could be born into Kedusha and remain that way, retain that level. But there was something that was still lacking, because you can come from nothing or you can be born into a great family. But how do you know your kids are going to follow in your footsteps? Yaakov added a certain propensity that your kids can even follow in your footsteps. All of Yaakov's children remain part of the Jewish fold. But there's one more thing. There's something else needs to be fenced off. Because you can be born into greatness, your children can be great, but they can leave the fold. They can sever their ties to the Jewish nation through marrying out. Their kids won't be Jewish. And therefore Yosef, in his travails with Potiphar's wife, where he retained his sanctity, his Jewishness, he added that final ingredient, that, if you like, safeguarding of the Jewish marriage. People, there are times in life when we're Avos, there are times in life when we're Bonim. What I mean by that is there are times in life where what we do is become role models, where what we do is we achieve things that raises the bar for others, as the Ran writes that every test has the effect of showing us what we can achieve, actually expressing what we can achieve, but showing others that the bar can be raised higher. But there are also times to reflect our forefathers, our ancestors, and become Bonim. Everything we do, every achievement we do, every successful travail, challenge that we pass is doing two things. We're reflecting our ancestors, we're Bonim, but it's also showing and paving the way for the next generation. Please God, we should be successful in both elements. Our element of being an Av, a parent, a role model, and our element of being a Ben, reflecting our ancestors.